Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So, this is a bit of a different video and getting into obviously the new league. I'm in Auckland probably as of Thursday, like midday. So, I was like, we'll do a video analyzing stuff because I was going to sort of do a bit of a, I guess, hit piece against D4 because they're not looking too crash hot. And, but this isn't really to blow smoke, like, they're different games, but D4 has actually done something really good for Path of Exile, which only D4 could have ever done for Path of Exile, and we're going to whip out the accounting graphs and stuff like that in the next couple minutes, but this will only be a really quick video. So, going through player stats on Path of Exile. So let's just make note of the glorious 87.09% user score of positivity, which out of 203,000 ratings is pretty damn good by any measure, indicating obviously PoE is the greatest game ever made. But anyway, if you didn't click on this video because of that, I don't know why you click on this video. But anyway, if we have a look at player scores, stats over the whatever months, we know that this is going to uplift, and we're sitting at about 10,000 concurrent players in PoE, with peaks of high and lows of up to 15 to 16,000 players. Look, 4 months into League, and this is just in the last week, by the way. 4 months into League, this is really good. So this isn't bad. This is like normal. Obviously, these are probably indicative of up and down times at like the AM mornings, but this is in UTC time, so on, so on. Anyway, just going down, and I'm building up to where my point is going here. So just looking at the I guess the last league start, we had a peak of 211,000 players according to these lifetime stats that are on Steam DB info and whatnot. Anyway, so we've got some drop off, but we can see here sort of the line is staying very well, like consistently actually higher than when we only had 3 month cycles. So on average, we're looking at like an increase of like anywhere from 3 to 6,000 players more in the fourth month of a league versus what we had in, I guess, a 3 month league cycle. And the same trend continues when we had the 4 month league cycle. We had 18.8 thousand players at about this time as well, compared to 2 leagues ago where we in 3 months, which is a month whole less of time span before the next league came out, we only had 10,825 players online. So what is this indicating? Well, the player base of PoE, like in that last month in particular, is strengthening. And so if we like roll back, we're holding player numbers a lot more consistently, which is indicative of Sanctum and Crucible, be it like not groundbreaking leagues, have been still very solid leagues, like a significant improvement over Archnem and Calandra, which we don't want to talk about Calandra. But anyway, a significant improvement over the leagues from 2-3 leagues ago, which is really good. It means GGG's listening to community, and we're getting what we want. But how is this going to be affected by Diablo 4? Well, for one thing, and I thought about multiple ways of how to put this in a video that would be like as objectively neutral as possible. Diablo 4 right now is getting absolutely review tanked, and this has been getting drastically worse over the last few days. So I pulled this screenshot, which I'll just pull up on screen. This was a few days ago, taken on the 6th of June. Oh, this release day 6th of June. Anyway, this was taken like a few days ago. And in that time, it's amassed another like what's that 1.4 nearly a fair few more ratings, nearly 2,000 more ratings since, and its point score has dropped by a whole 0.5 rating on Metacritic, which is pretty bad. Like let's be real here. And part of the reason for that is obviously now people are getting into the end game, and even with the season 1 that's come out. So number one, bad patching is a horrible idea for a new game to start introducing nerfs straight away. And obviously we've seen how that went with GGG, where the player base drops off and whatnot. I just realized I have a stain on my shirt for some reason, so we're just going to ignore that. Anyway, so patching and nerfing is obviously a very bad idea, especially for a newer game. And then that's what they've done. They've basically come into the new season 1, they've nerfed stuff, made stuff not as intuitive. But the biggest issue that I guess people are facing with the game now is as the casual player base moves on, and that's what's currently happening. Now, are the casual players going to come back and play Diablo 4 every single season? I'm used to saying legal PoE. Not necessarily, because cash players are going to play the campaign once, and they may play a little bit beyond that. But if the game gets too grindy, they're just going to move on, and that's like the vast majority of players that will play like, new release games and whatnot. It's like the flavor of the month sort of thing. And then basically over time, your player base dwindles. This is the same sort of outcome that happened with D3, same thing that happened with D2R, like a heap of players at the start, but they never really did anything to sustain the player base. And like season 1 was a really safe season 1 for Diablo 4, so it wasn't doing anything groundbreaking. And I'd say like there's nothing realistically heavily planned until they get to like their first expansion, where they'll have a huge uplift again, but they're going to make a ton of revenue again, because basically that's where people are going to come back and say, well, we've got to play through the campaign again, level up a new turn or whatever. Anyway, what's currently happening is they're meeting their own maker with the fact that their endgame in D4, and for anyone defending it, like it's a game for somebody and definitely appeals to the casual player base. And I'm strictly looking at this, comparing it to, I guess, a much more developed game over a 10-year life cycle. But I'm not really giving Blizzard much quarter here, because they are a multi-billion-dollar company versus GGG, which is not a multi-billion-dollar company. So there's opposing arguments that should say, well, give Diablo 4 a break, because, it's not been out for anywhere near the time. In fact, it's a newer release or whatnot. You don't really get a break. You don't get a pass for doing shoddy work. And at the end of the day, what's been done with Diablo 4 is essentially release a game, get it out the door, get the player base which they appeal to, which is casual, to buy it. However, try and put in mechanics that appeal to a more hardcore audience at the same time. And inevitably, as the casual player base declines off of that player base, because they move on to other things, there's always new games coming out all the time, then you're left with the hardcore players that are going to want to play that game consistently. Now, the problem there lies is the lack of endgame. So, Nightmare Dungeons and whatnot get to a limit. It's even based on the patch where I think I put a video up about it, where they changed the leveling rate to which you level up. That's a problematic patch, because that's something that they would have made an active decision to limit initially when the game came out, and that was to drag the distance of the game's launch out to get it close to Season 1. So if you make the grind longer, the people that are staying will obviously grind to try and reach that achievement at level 100. And that's, I'm a 50-50 as to whether that was an active decision from a design perspective initially to basically sluice the XP system and then allow this big, anchor it there and then say, oh, we're buffing everything and we're giving you more XP later down the track after release to get player retention numbers up. It's very likely a strategy they've applied. I don't know. Who knows? But I've just got a theory that sort of seems really weird that you would retool your XP gain system so drastically just after, not too far past release, but long enough that you can keep players active, moving close to the Season 1 launch. It just seems really odd. So anyway, what we're seeing now is a vastly eroding player score, and we just ignore critics because, let's be real, 89 critic scores, and these are paid reviews and not worth your time looking at. We're going to look at user score because that's real people playing the endgame. And so basically what's happening here is the ratings are coming in, and what we're seeing is an erosion of the player base and their happiness with the game, simply because the game is not catering to that. After level 50, what do? Like, there's only so many hours that you can mindlessly do exactly the same format of something without any variety, and that's basically all Diablo 4 has to offer in its endgame. And objectively, like, even personally, and I'm not saying that it's a bad game. I'm actually not saying it's a bad game. This is probably a bad score because of how people negatively reacted to the patch as well. I think it's probably more like a 5 out of 10, realistically. I don't think it's anything groundbreaking, but I definitely don't think it's anything special. Like, I don't have the enthusiasm for Diablo that I once did, and I definitely don't have the enthusiasm for Diablo that I have for PoE, because I love PoE. It's just, to me, it's the best thing since sliced bread. So I am biased in that respect. But what's basically happening now is people are getting to the point where the campaign just isn't enough, clearly, because it's just a campaign. And the season content really isn't anything huge or game breaking. And the other thing is, I guess, people that were sold this game, because of the way that it was sold as like this almost pseudo MMORPG. Potentially there's the misconception that you could continue to level your character up into the new season and you wouldn't have to re-roll a new character, which, you know, in one respect is ignorant of the player base, and in the other respect is ignorant of the game developers in selling something where that wasn't really clearly articulated. And maybe it was, but I don't know. Like, to me, it seems like a given for a game like Diablo. But for newer people who don't know anything and have no history, and maybe come from a MMO background or whatever it might be, that would be something that would be really like a deterrent, because you're like, well, I spend like 3 months leveling up this character just to throw it in the bin and start again. And, you know, sometimes it feels like that, but I guess the achievements that you get from games like PoE really keep it going, and the way they refresh it every month, and the clear number of builds that you can play that are still some being heavily gated behind currency, but the vast majority are moderately achievable, and there's a lot of guidance on how to get there as well and the methods to get there. So PoE's just got a much richer community in that respect, which is what Diablo 4 either doesn't have yet, or it just will not develop because the clear limitations of the game as well as the limitations of the end game. So how does this look when you start to map the actual player numbers? Well, I went to this website after a little bit of research. Now, I don't know how accurate this data is. This is coming off what's called player auctions, which seems like a bit of a dodge, you know, one of those websites. But anyway, it's giving us Google Trend stats, and this is, I'm going to base it off this. They've applied their methodology here, and you can see that there's a clear decrease in the number of players, concurrent players. Now, should they be worried at this stage? Fuck no. Like, they've got a huge player base. Like, it's in the millions. It's crazy big. It's way bigger than PoE. Like, there's no denying that. What's concerning is the level of degradation of the player base, and 10% to 2.9 million, you know, or from whatever its previous point is, in the hundreds of thousands of players. And this is actually something that I started pulling the numbers in. So I've got my sources down here, which is another website of similar nature. We start to look at like a trend of how Diablo, Diablo, I was going to say Path of Exile, how Diablo is actually operating here. So we can see like in the two like betas, the closed beta and the open beta, like had huge player numbers. And then it drops some numbers because obviously people will play the game and they'll be like, oh, fuck this game's terrible. So it lost like 13%, which isn't huge. Like 2.7 million players on release is still a bloody excellent achievement, and they should be really proud of that. It's a great achievement. But also, should you be proud of a game that you spent probably millions of dollars marketing as well to get an exceptional level of reach, and you get 2.7 million players? That's probably what should be expected if you're going to spend the money they've spent on it. Whereas you look at a game like Path, and it's just a significantly less budget that they have to actually advertise the game versus that. Again, this is a David versus Goliath comparison here, which is why you really can't compare the two games. But then you look at July 9th and we see like a little bit of uplift. This is coming into like the new season release and whatnot. So it's like, okay, this is starting to pick up again. And we get to where we are now, which we get to 2.6 million players. Now we're looking at like a 9 to 10% growth degradation in just a very short amount of time, within the span of 2 weeks. Within the span of 2 weeks, you've lost 10% of your player count. Seems like, I don't know, there could be other factors, other games coming out. It could be native population loss. But it seems like if that trend continues, that's going to be a real negative later down the track as the player numbers drop. And they'll continue to drop. People will get bored. Like, the season content, if it's consistent with season 1, then it's really not going to grab players back every single time. Like, we look at like Path of Exile, a whole new game mechanics and game styles like Sanctum, which was roguelites, or, you know, even some of the bad leagues that have come out, like, you look like Sentinel. Like, there's always something really creative and grabs you, and there's like goals to it. Whereas Diablo 4, there's not really that same level of, I don't know, there's something different about Path of Exile versus like Diablo 4's seasons just feel like commercially like bankrupt of any feeling. It's really hard to explain, but that's the way that I feel about it. Like, I'm not really excited by Diablo 4, but I'm not really a Diablo 4 player anyway. Anyway, why is this good? Well, if we go back to the chart that we like to look at, which is our Path of Exile, number one, player exposure to a new ARPG like Diablo 4, in particular targeting a more casual audience, is not a bad thing for a game like Path of Exile. Because if you attract 10 players, but, and this could be in Path's sort of example here, so the players that are leaving Diablo 4 are looking to potentially play now similar games to Diablo 4 because they're like, hey, I've played Diablo 4. It's not a terrible game, but I got bored with it. I'm looking for something to scratch that itch. And then they look at Path of Exile. And you got to give hats off to GGG. They have strategically, perfectly anchored themselves in a really good position here with ExileCon and the number of announcements, and then the announcements that they're estimating around PoE 2, and then hopefully we get a release date for early next year or something like that, and that would be huge. Like, that would be absolutely huge. But even in the interim right now, the fact that they're now doing ExileCon like a week or two after the Season 1 launch, for Diablo, while Diablo's sort of on the player decline, they're picking up the curtail of the players dropping off Diablo straight into their game. So it's almost like Diablo starts feeding into Path of Exile, and then say they attract like 10 players, right? If you maintain 3 players of every 10 players that you attract, that's a 30% uptick, even if it were 2 out of 10. And then multiply that 10 by however many, hundreds or whatever, you take into, an extra like 200,000 or 300,000 players that go, hey, I want to try out PoE. I tried out Diablo 4. PoE seems like it might be a really cool game. I've looked at it. It looks really similar. It's really cool. There's tons of great reviews. There's tons of content. I'm going to give this a bash because this could be really cool. And they've got a big event on. I'm really hyped up. And obviously I am hyped up because I'm going to ExileCon, so I'm fucking amped right now. And so I'm going to give the game a crack. And so some people, which is usually the case with PoE, and one of the bad negative points about PoE is its player retention ability. Its ability to attract players is great, but its ability to retain players because of its complexity and the lack of, I guess, that initial hand-holding is one of its disadvantages. But for the players that stay, and there's generally a number, we can see that growth rate as we go down here. We can see that progressive growth league on league, and that player retention over the, nearly last 10 years. What we're going to get is this significant uptick, potentially. And I say potentially because it may or may not happen. Like, we don't know how people are going to behave. But Diablo has really opened the door to attract a lot of these newer players, because for a long time ARPGs, over the years haven't been as big, anywhere near as big as what they are. But as other game modes have become less attractive, like your battle royales and things like that, ARPGs have just slowly been creeping back up again, becoming the flavor of the month again, and that's what Diablo 4 has done. So I guess summing this up, like, realistically, I think because Diablo 4 came out, that's actually going to make PoE a more favorable game for other more hardcore players to try. And potentially they got into Diablo 4, they'll go, hey, PoE looks great, and they'll stay. And we could see one of the biggest player upticks that we have ever seen in Path of Exile in this league in 3.22 because of Diablo 4. Now, the other thing is I might just be completely off the mark and can be completely wrong about this, but I have a gut feeling that based on, I guess, some of the reviews that people are writing in here, which honestly are pretty crass, and it's probably a video for another day. They're absolutely bloody horrible. Things like, this is not fun, Blizzard, all sorts of things like that. People calling it a cash grab, it's getting called every name under the sun, which, I'm not going to go into the detail of the way that I feel about it because I want to stay relatively objective where I can. But, I don't disagree with this. Like, it is highly repetitive. It has weak gameplay. And obviously we expect more out of Blizzard, but we don't really get that these days. But anyway, look, these are the people that are going to come over to Path of Exile and give it a whack and find that PoE has a completely robust endgame system and everything else in between. And that could only be a great thing for Path of Exile. And I hope so that that's the case, because PoE absolutely deserves the player base that it has, and it deserves growth because it is a really good game. Anyway, I thought I'd do this video. I just thought it was a really interesting topic to discuss, and I'm also amped up for ExileCon, and this is probably one of the first videos I'm going to make on the series of getting G'd up for 3.22. But anyway, until next time, don't forget to like and sub. Don't forget to check out the Twitch as well. I'm pretty much streaming dedicated over in Twitch these days because of everyone's TOS rules are too hard to navigate, so we just pick one platform and go with it. But anyway, you'll see stuff from me throughout ExileCon as well, because I'm probably going to take a GoPro with me. And yeah, until then, have a good one, and bye.